We begin with our top story this hour, and boy is it big. The International Monetary Fund has the board has approved $3.4 billion in emergency financing for Nigeria to help deal with the economic damage inflicted by the coronavirus pandemic. The loan aims to support the authorities' efforts in addressing the severe economic impact of the COVID-19 shock and the sharp fall in oil prices. The funds come from the IMF's RFI, the rapid financing instrument, which has been ramped up to get aid quickly to developing nations most vulnerable to the economic effects of shutdowns to contain the outbreak. IMF Managing Director Kristina Georgieva said the fund has received well over 100 requests for aid from its members, and developing countries will need about $2.5 trillion to deal with the impact of the pandemic. Joining me live to discuss this development is the IMF's Senior Resident Representative and Mission Chief in Nigeria, Mr. Amine Mati. Good morning, sir. You're welcome to the Global Business Report. I want to try and establish a relationship between the IMF's RFI and the SDR. Can you start by helping us with the definition of the RFI?
Thank you, Rotis. Thank you for having me on the show. So the RFI is a rapid financing instrument. It is an emergency financial assistance facility put in place and available to all member countries to respond to urgent balance of payment needs. This is a facility that can be drawn upon when a large shock happens. Could be the terms of trade shock, like an oil price collapse, natural disasters. This has been used in the past for hurricane or earthquakes, and before COVID-19 for Mozambique, that was also used. So this is a facility that, as you rightly said at the beginning, has been ramped up to help the IMF answer the needs of the countries facing the COVID-19 pandemic, which has had a large impact on both the fiscal balances, the external balances, the large contraction on growth that is affecting the population. The amount on the RFI itself, before the crisis, before COVID-19, a member could draw 50% of its quota. To answer the demand and the needs faced by countries, the IMF has ramped up to 100% of quota. Now, what is a quota? It is a subscription of a country when they join the IMF. It has a certain part that it is paying in foreign currency, and its other part that is in national currency. That is the subscription, if you want, that each member country has. Now, on the quota for Nigeria, it is 2.4 billion in SDR, and that is an equivalent of about $3.4 billion. So you asked the question about what is the SDR and the amount. The SDR is the unit of account that is used by the IMF. It's an international reserve asset that was created in 1969, and it's a composed basket of 5 currencies, major currencies, US dollar, British pound, the euro, the renminbi, and the Japanese yen. Now, that's why you hear sometimes 2.4 billion SDR amount, which is 100% of Nigeria's quota. So Nigeria, and the quota itself is determined by GDP, economic variability, reserves. Some of those are part of the quota determination. So that's how the quota amount is determined, and then that's how, when we say 100% of account for Nigeria, the amount was $2.4 billion SDR, which is equivalent to about $3.4 billion.
Thank you so much for that explanation. So there's certain metrics like GDP which determine the SDR, and then you said that the RFI, there's a subscription. So if I understand you correctly, just to follow up on...
Let me just clarify. I think it's the SDR is a basket of currency.
Okay.
On the quota, this is where we have GDP, economic variability, international reserves, openness that determines the quota.
Fantastic, fantastic. So for the RFI, you said it's based on a subscription. So this is what is put in there by the member countries that eventually draw on it. So can I ask, if that's the case, is there a cost to that and then a payback period for this 3.4 billion that was approved for Nigeria?
This is a loan, right? So where all the loans coming is that resources for all the IMF loans are provided by all members countries, primarily through the quota. And there's also other arrangements to borrow, and the total IMF package available to land is about $1 trillion that has been resources available. So in this case, when we talk about what is the facility, so it is a loan of 5 years. It's $3.4 billion. The interest rate is very low. It's 1%. It's a tenth or 1/12 of what the international capital markets have right now. And the repayment starts about after 3.25 years, and to be finished after 5 years, and it's in quarterly disbursements, 8 quarterly disbursements at that.
And I believe Christina Georgieva said that we would get access to those funds by the end of this month, correct?
And those funds should be, the IMF Executive Board has approved the RFI for Nigeria, and we expect those funds to come in the next day or two.
Okay, now, thank you for that. The Central Bank of Nigeria, along with the private sector, put together a pretty large coalition, the COVID-19, the Coalition Against COVID-19. A lot of effort, billions of naira in charitable donations to set up ICU centers to feed the poor and so on and so forth. Are efforts like that part of what you review when considering these loan disbursements, or do you stick with the initial metrics that you've already described for us for the RFI?
Thank you. When we looked at the situation in Nigeria, we looked at the nature of the shock and how much, what would be the balance of payment financing gap and what was the fiscal gap. If you look at it, you have a sharp fall in oil exports, and you had capital outflows. We have the foreign holdings of short-term debt that has decreased significantly since the beginning of the year. And that resulted in a financing gap. That financing gap is what we looked at in order to determine how much support there is, but also because, for Nigeria on the RFI, it was the full facility, 100% that was there. We looked at the balance of payment gap that we looked at was about $14 billion, and the fiscal gap is about $11 billion. So there was need for international financial assistance immediately, and from us, but also from other development partners, and that's under that purview that the IMF facility has come in. Now, those programs that you talked about from the central bank to try to help businesses cope with the crisis are welcome, and those by the government, the 500 billion naira crisis intervention fund with public works program to help on health spending. Those are the type of programs that will be financed, that our budget support help will have finance. And let me also emphasize that as part of the RFI, the government was also tracking its crisis emergency spending, having budget line. It will be reporting it on the Treasury portal. It will do an audit of this crisis response fund, just to be transparent out there about how that the money is used for its intended purposes to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic.
Thank you so much for that explanation, Amine. Now, I wanted to ask, if the fight against COVID-19 for worst-case scenario is extended, is the IMF still prepared to pledge more support to the member countries that it has already assisted? We've only got about a minute left. If you can just give me a quick summary on that.
And right now, the focus of the IMF and the authorities have been to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic and try to render financial assistance as quickly as possible. The RFI has come in because putting a program in place would take time. So this is the immediate response that could be provided as quickly as possible. The authorities have not approach us for any other type of program at this stage. So the focus was on the emergency facility. If there is a request for further support, the IMF will be there to look at that.
All right. Thank you so much for your time. So I have so many more questions for you. We'll probably have to invite you back on the program. I really appreciate your time. We've been talking to Mr. Amine Marté, the IMF Senior Resident Representative and Mission Chief for Nigeria.